Welcome, NFL fans, to our fifth and final episode of Sports Kings chatting up the NFL playoffs. The Super Bowl was last week. What a great game that was, right, guys? And our first topic is going to be a little recap of what happened during the game. And I guess we'll go right to David because he's going to school us. David was the only one last week who decided to pick the defense over the offense, and that being the Seattle Supersonics. Ooh.
Wow.
They're going to hate me in Washington.
That takes me back.
The Seattle Seahawks over the Denver Broncos. But before we jump into that, let me introduce our panel. Tonight with us we have Austin.
How's it going, fellas? Good to be back after having a bye week last week. You know, I think this is one of the first Super Bowls that I can remember that had a better halftime show than an actual game.
Bruno. And we have Brett.
Hey, guys. Still not Austin. I don't know if you see that down here this time, Andy, but I'm not Austin this week. I'm going back to being Brett.
He finally got his lower third in there, so I don't mix him up anymore. Then we have David, who you're going to hear from momentarily.
Great to be back.
And last but not least, we have Shane.
Good to be here. I'm calling it right now. Arizona Cardinals, the first team to play the Super Bowl in their home stadium, 2015.
Bold prediction, bold prediction.
And myself, I'm one of your hosts, Andy. And we'll open right up with the recap of our picks from last week. I don't expect everybody to remember what they picked for score necessarily, but Brett and I both rocked the Broncos along with Michael, who's not here this week. Shane and Austin both missed last week. Shane had preseason picked the Broncos over the Seahawks, and David, you picked Seattle last week. What do you got to say?
Well, I want to apologize to all our viewers for completely underestimating the Seahawks. 28-20 was my pick, and then they just went out and laid the wood on. I tried to tell you guys it would be defense over offense, that Manning and the Broncos wouldn't be able to move the ball against the standard set. That was the key to the whole game, was Seattle never had to get out of their standard set. They'd studied the plays. They'd studied the hand signals. They knew exactly what Denver was going to do every step of the way. And there's kind of an aspect to it that I don't think has been talked about as much, and that is that it seems like the Seahawks were the much better prepared team. Pete Carroll had his team much better prepared than Fox. They came in, they knew exactly what they were doing. They had a game plan, they executed it, and throughout the entire thing, they basically got the job done. So they, at the end of the day, it was a complete blowout, and unfortunately not a good game, not as good as the halftime show, and that's a pretty sad affair.
Yeah, and I was more prepared for the Super Bowl than the Broncos appeared to be.
Yeah, I think so.
Brett, I guess you and I have, as Ricky Ricardo would say, some splaining to do. So let's start with you, and what do you have to say? 43-8.
Not much. Not much. I think Dave was right on with it that their defense was a lot more prepared than the Broncos were, and that's pretty much it. I mean, we saw it. They just couldn't perform. I don't know what was going on with Peyton Manning. I don't know if it was the defense, if they knew his hand signals, like Richard Sherman says, but they were not prepared. They looked really awful.
Well, the crowd noise was a big factor, too. From the first play on, it seemed like I never heard the word Omaha because they couldn't get into a rhythm offensively. It was like they had to do the hand signals, and they weren't getting to their best play, it seemed like. Playing at home throughout the playoffs was one thing. Going into a semi-hostile environment, it was like a completely different team showed up.
Yeah, my condolences to the term Omaha, because
Yeah.
it's rest in peace at this point. So let's go on to the guys who weren't here last week, and that's Shane and Austin, even though I called Austin's name out last week when I clearly meant Brett.
I appreciate that.
Let's go with you first, Austin. What did you think of the game?
Ryan, stat going into it that was standing out to me, like it used to be the last 8 Super Bowls, we'll call it 9 now, the top-rated offense has not won the Super Bowl. It's always been the defensive team. And, Denver just had such a magical season. It was Super Bowl or bust out there, and you just felt like it would happen. And to me, that would have been the better storyline. But as we saw, that did not happen at all. I just feel like with Peyton Manning and that offense, they have a plan. And when things do not go according to plan, they're not able to improv their way out of it. If the plan's not working, then things go awry. And they just the Seattle Seahawks just seemed to have so much more energy in that game. And there were times in the game where I felt like they were playing in Seattle, because that Seattle fan base was definitely there, and it felt like we were at CenturyLink. But the Broncos were stuck and having to throw the ball a lot, and the Seahawks had a balanced offense, and they had a complete game. They scored in every way imaginable you can in all three phases of the game. And like Dave was saying, Peyton Manning could not get in a rhythm. And I also want to echo something that I believe Dave mentioned a few weeks back. The AFC was just underclassed, not a very strong conference at all, whereas in the NFC you had a lot more of a battle over there. And to be honest, it doesn't matter what AFC team it would have been, I still think the NFC would have came out on top with that strong defense.
So, Shane, you weren't here either last week. You did admit, however, that, because it's in print, there's no way of getting away from it, that you were picking Denver for the Super Bowl champions. So, what were your thoughts on the game?
Well, early on, they had the miscues, obviously, from the opening snap. But one thing that people also have to remember is that Denver had two of their starting offensive linemen out, tackle Ryan Clady and guard Chris Cooper. So, once you get behind an offensive line and you have a makeshift offensive line like Denver's, and you allow a Seattle defense that probably has the best pass rush in the league just to pin the ears back and tee off on you every play because they know the pass is coming, the game was over. It felt like to me, as soon as Percy Harvin ran that score back, that Peyton Manning and the Broncos were just trying to get out of there. It just felt like they were not rushing to the line, like trying to even get back in the game. So, unfortunately for Peyton Manning and the Broncos, they got behind early, and that's how Seattle was able to capitalize on it.
And I think, as far as my prediction of Denver winning goes, Brett kind of summed that up for me as well. There's nothing I can say. I'm standing behind a plate of glass here. I'm see-through. You can see through me. My pick couldn't have been wrong. I keep looking at 43-8, and that makes me want to cry as somebody who picked the Broncos. My whole philosophy behind that was the fact that I thought, and we talked about it last week, I had it written down on a sheet of paper, too many weapons. I think I said that, Michael said that, Brett said that, David laughed at us, and he was dead on, and I just thought Decker and Demaryius Thomas and Julius Thomas and Wes Welker were going to be a little too much for Seattle. Granted, the defense is hard-nosed, they're good, but Shane's point, Shane had a very good point about the offensive linemen being out, because Denver did have statistically the best offensive line this season. I think they allowed 20 sacks in the regular season, which is phenomenal. The only ones even close to that, I think, were the Lions. I don't know how, with like 23 sacks given up. So, you would have thought that line would have had a little more control, but, missing a couple of key guys does hurt. And I just feel like to see somebody like Peyton Manning look so helpless, that pocket was like, I've never seen a pocket, start like this and just do this every time. And it was just like they were putting those linemen back to back against each other, and it was really a sight to behold.
There was just like a sense of panic the entire game from from Denver as a whole. And Seattle came in with so much more confidence, a chip on their shoulder. The coin toss, Seattle wins it, and the last thing you want to do typically is give Peyton Manning the ball. And this Legion of Boom is like, you go ahead, Peyton, you take it first. And it just seemed like there was a panic the whole time. The miscue, and that's adding to the noise level once again. Just insane that on a neutral field it was that loud. And yeah, just after that miscue, I was like, all right, they'll get out of it. And then some more scores came, and I'm like, I'm not seeing much out of Denver. They're not getting it going. You're not even seeing an attempt. This is Seattle's game.
I know Shane touched on the offensive line injuries, but actually when I was watching Denver's defense, I was thinking about the absence of Von Miller, and I believe Elvis Dumervil was out as well. I don't think they sacked Russell Wilson once the entire game. He looked like, even on third down when you knew they'd be blitzing third and long, he's able to escape the pocket, find the receiver, get a first down. And yes,
They need a class on tackling.
yeah, they missed lots of tackles, but I wonder if the game would have been a little different with Von Miller and Elvis Dumervil in there. I know Manning would have still looked like crap, but maybe they stopped Seattle a couple more times.
Well, that's the thing. Good defense is going to translate into good offense, and I think the same can be said vice versa. So let's jump right into Peyton Manning. We touched on it last week. Again, I know Austin and Shane missed this, but I think you guys watched the show. We talked about Peyton Manning's legacy. How did this Super Bowl affect his legacy? I think some of us, or most of us were in agreement that, either way, his legacy is very strong, but there's no way that a Super Bowl win or loss doesn't in some way affect your legacy overall. So we'll start with you, Austin, because I miss your face, and we'll go with you. How do you think this Super Bowl loss? I think Manning's 1-2 now in Super Bowls, in I think 11-12 in playoff games. How does this loss affect his legacy?
Right, and I apologize I couldn't be here last week, but I mean it adds to the greatness, but I don't think it ruins it as much as people think with the loss. I mean, you have to look at his career as a whole. He's still, in my opinion, a top 3 quarterback. Just the bulk of work, the records that are being broke, the comeback. We saw Brady come back from a knee injury, and I feel like the neck injury was even more severe, and he was able to come back and break records, have a career year, and his career is not over. And to get to the Super Bowl that many times, I think, is a feat in itself. There's got to be a loser, and unfortunately for Peyton Manning and the team that he's been on, he has fallen short and what people say the big moments. I don't think it hurts it as much as people say. In my opinion, he's still considered one of the best. I just don't think that Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos as a whole faced a team like Seattle all year long. And that was apparent when the big game came.
David, the reigning Super Bowl champion. What's your thoughts on this question?
Last week I was here saying that I felt like this was a pretty big deal, that to get that second title, that it was always a but. It's like, won a lot of games, but couldn't beat Tom Brady. Won a lot of games, but lost in the first round. And that's still the case. And we do have a tendency to knee-jerk react to these things. That it's only, Tuesday or Wednesday after the game, or, oh my gosh, that's our last impression of him. But he did win a Super Bowl, and if you look at some guys, even going back to the Buffalo Bills and Jim Kelly. Now, was Jim Kelly a worse quarterback because Scott Norwood couldn't hit a field goal and win a football game? No. At some point, defense, special teams comes into play. Peyton has never been blessed with the types of defenses that maybe some of the Cowboys, 49ers, Steelers, legacies had, where they could get 2, 3, 4 championships. So certainly, I mean, the numbers he put up were ridiculous. Best single-season, regular season quarterback ever, marched through the playoffs. He just ran into a buzzsaw and faced a better team, as he did against the Saints and as he did against the Patriots all those years. The 1 year against the Bears and Rex Grossman, boom, he wins the championship because, well, it's Rex Grossman. But to look and to see what he did, it tarnishes the legacy a little bit. He won't be in that elite status at the best of all time, but he certainly is in the top 3, as was alluded to by Austin.
All right, Shane.
Where I think it affected his legacy, and Dave kind of touched on it, was before the Super Bowl, the question was, is Peyton Manning the GOAT? Is he the greatest of all time? And I think where the Super Bowl loss impacts him is in that discussion, is he the greatest? I mean, when you look at Jim Kelly or Dan Marino, we still think that they're Hall of Fame great quarterbacks, but we don't put them in that same echelon as Joe Montana. So I think Peyton Manning just took a step backwards in the GOAT discussion. I don't think he's going to be able to recover from it without winning another Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think, and before we get to Brett, I think that was a really good point there is the discussion you put in, the people you're surrounded by. And I think you'll be able to obviously surround Peyton with guys like Marino and Jim Kelly, and it's good company. But I do still think Marino, I hear Marino, when people talk about the best ever, I still hear Marino's name. It's quickly followed by he doesn't have any Super Bowl wins. But, people do still consider Dan Marino, I think.
And it's because they considered the whole bulk of the career.
The body of work, yes.
Exactly,
So
yes.
Let's get Brett's thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, I know I had all those stats last week. I don't think anything's changed. I don't think anything was going to change for me. If he won the Super Bowl, great, he's got another Super Bowl. If he lost, even if it was as embarrassing as it was, I still think top 3, definitely top 5 quarterback of all time. I mean, it's hard to put him ahead of Manning or Elway because of their Super Bowl wins. But like I said last week, he's only a couple thousand yards away.
Montana or Elway, right?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. What did I say?
You said himself.
Manning, okay.
I thought you were talking about Eli, maybe.
I knew you weren't talking about Eli. I won't even insult you in that way.
I mean, he's close to having the most yards of all time, most passing touchdowns of all time. He has 51 come from behind wins in the fourth quarter. I mean, his numbers are amazing, and he's, I think, definitely probably the best quarterback of this era. I mean, maybe a discussion with Brady in there, but I think he's top 5 of all time.
Well, I think another thing people are going to look at with Peyton Manning is his intelligence. I mean, that guy wasn't just out there making throws. And actually, a lot of times you look at the balls he throws and you're like, how does that get anywhere? He doesn't have that tight spiral. The way the ball travels isn't the smoothest when you speak of guys like a Dan Marino or even like a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers. They throw a smooth ball, and Manning never did that. But he's intelligent. He coaches the team on the field. He gets to the line. He audibles you to death. Omaha! We're going to keep pounding that. But he did the extra things, I think. And at the end of the day, for me, I personally felt like if he won, it was going to do a lot more for his legacy in a positive way than if he had lost, negatively damaging his legacy. If that makes sense to you guys. Mm-hmm. I feel like a Super Bowl win was going to be so big for him. It might have made him the best ever. But I feel like the Super Bowl loss, while it might hurt him a little bit, I agree with Brett. I think it still leaves him in the top 5. So does anybody else have anything to say about Peyton Manning? I
had a question for Shane, actually. I didn't know if did you think that he's not the best of the era? Because I know it's a different topic for another day.
Well, no, it's still relevant, but I was going to say because of the loss, I really think it gives the Brady supporters a lot of momentum to assert their argument that he's the best of this era. I mean, Brady's been to what, 5 or 6 Super Bowls? And he's won 3?
I think he's 3 and 2.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that.
Well, and the other thing is, I think, is Tom Brady very well could win another Super Bowl. I mean, so what would that further do? I think that further damages Peyton's legacy if Brady wins one more and he can't win another one. I mean, at this point, Peyton has that factoring against him.
I think it'll have to be how they end up at the end of the career. I mean, I don't think Manning's done. I know Brady's not done. So I think it's going to have to be the end of the career, and we're still looking. I don't know how many more years Manning has. Could be 1, could be 3 or 4.
I think
and Matt Stafford's not done either.
Who's not done?
No, I didn't say anything. So let's jump right into the counterpart at the quarterback position for this big game. We talked about this last week too. Russell Wilson. Again, Shane and Austin missed this, but we talked about this I think in our first episode a little bit. The young gun, the new wave type quarterbacks, and the way Russell Wilson works into that. And we talked a little bit last week about what this meant for him if he won the Super Bowl. Does he automatically catapult ahead of these guys like Cam Newton, Colin Kaepernick, Andrew Luck? I think we decided to not talk about RG3 anymore. But, for these new style of quarterbacks, does this put Russell Wilson ahead? And I know we talked about his stats a little bit, what he would need to do. I mean, he couldn't throw 150 yards and, just kind of manage the game and get away with everybody talking about how brilliant he was. But he did have a pretty solid game. Real quick before we go into that, he was 206 passing yards, 72 completion percentage, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers. And he made a few plays with his legs, too. I mean, he did a good job overall, I thought. Although, it was a little easy given the offense of the other team. But at the same time, I feel like the 206 yards is kind of downplayed a little bit because they didn't really need to throw a whole lot in that game. But let's jump to you first, Austin. We'll go to you, Austin, first. What do you think about Russell Wilson as far as him taking a leap ahead of these other guys in his same class, I guess we'll call it?
Right, and you know, so you want to put him in the same class as like Kaepernick and Cam Newton, and you know, another comparison I like to make from a few draft years back is Joe Flacco and Matt Ryan. You have to give a little bit of an edge to Flacco just because they're in the same draft class. They're both pretty comparable. However, Flacco did get a Super Bowl ring, but then again, it's the cast that he has, that defense, that Ravens defense. It's not more so that Russell Wilson won the Super Bowl for the Seahawks. He's just not responsible for losing the Super Bowl for the Seahawks. He didn't make any mistakes. 0 turnovers, that's huge. A great completion percentage, as you pointed out earlier. He spread the ball around. He hit up like 8 different receivers in that game, and it doesn't hurt when your special teams and defense is getting it done for you as well. He just played a solid, mistake-free game, and that's all you can expect out of a second-year quarterback. And, you know, he was just the man for the job over there. He accepted his role, didn't need to do too much. They realize over there in Seattle that it is a team game, and, you know, they all have their own personal chips on their shoulders, but they understand that they probably aren't who they are without each other.
Brett, we'll head right over to you.
I know I made this comparison last week, and first I want to say that I was actually really impressed with what Russell Wilson did. I think last week when we talked about it, I said he needs to limit his turnovers. He needs to, you know, have a couple hundred yards, which he did. He didn't seem to make mistakes. He seemed to always, when they needed a first down, he seemed to get the first down. And I was impressed by him. And I know last week I mentioned Alex Smith, in that the Kansas City, when they were winning, was relying on their defense, relying on Jamal Charles, limiting the mistakes with Alex Smith. And Russell Wilson reminded me of him a lot last week. And I know it's a weird comparison, and game manager gets thrown around as a derogatory term all the time, but he managed the game, and he did what he had to do. They won.
David, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with these guys. I think about it this way. If you switch quarterbacks on those two teams, will we be talking about how the Broncos dominated the Seahawks because Peyton Manning made so many mistakes? Probably not. The game wasn't decided at the quarterback position, and Peyton Manning struggled against a good defense. He would have probably lit up his own defense had he had a chance to play it. And you look at the reference that Austin made in terms of it being a team sport. You don't need to have the best quarterback. In some cases, Peyton Manning's been basically a quarterback surrounded by a little bit of talent, and a guy like Russell Wilson came in with a solid running game, great wide receivers. I don't think any wide receiver had more than 70 yards. He spread the ball around. I was really impressed with his third down completion percentage. Even when the game was still in doubt, because they were getting safeties and field goals and not touchdowns early, they needed some key third down conversions. He was able to either do it with his legs or with that short pass, usually over the middle. He put it on the money. He missed on some early down passes, but would make those big passes, and he managed the game, and he's a Super Bowl winner. Not every Super Bowl quarterback, if you win a game like a Jeff Hostetler or a Trent Dilfer, that doesn't mean you're all of a sudden an elite quarterback. I'm not saying he's one of those guys. I certainly would take him over the other class, the Kaepernicks and the Newtons, because if you're looking at those guys, they haven't been able to win when it counts, and Russell Wilson's played good teams and he's done it. So kudos to him for that, but at the same time, I'm not nobody here is ready to put him in that elite status and start throwing around terms like Brady, Manning, that sort of thing.
So Shane, your thoughts?
Well, here's what I think about Wilson. I kind of feel like we're kind of discussing his legacy, and what I would say about Wilson at this point is that we can probably look at him as the best of his draft class. There were 11 quarterbacks selected in the 2012 draft. He's already done more than all of them by winning the Super Bowl. As far as the game goes and his performance, I think Dave made a great comparison about switching the quarterbacks, and with the Seattle Seahawks still have won with Peyton Manning behind the line. I also think Dave took on my thunders the third down conversions. If you saw Russell Wilson on third downs often, he would stand in the pocket. If he felt pressure, he would roll out, and he would convert that third down. I think that was the biggest plus of his performance.
And the one thing I think that I took away from Russell Wilson is you guys have talked. I mean, Dave, you hit on it. Austin hit on it. Brett hit on it. And Shane, you just kind of piggybacked off of it too, is the fact that Russell Wilson didn't really need to do anything to win that game. I think, the defense did enough. The Broncos did enough for the Seahawks to win that game. I mean, let's be frank. The one thing I do like is that he didn't he didn't really seem to hide. I mean, 206 yards, 2 touchdowns, and that completion percentage of 72. I feel like it would have been real easy for a guy like him in his position. He's a young guy. He's not necessarily, your prototypical like 6'3" stand in the pocket, your Rodgers, your Brady, your Manning type quarterback, and just throw darts. It would have been easy for him to hide in this game, I think, and to be completely overlooked. But he did some things, and I think some of that's Percy Harvin. I mean, what a breath of fresh air it is for Russell Wilson to have him back. I mean, you kind of almost want to think about some of the things he could have done in the passing game had he had Harvin all season. But I think I like what he did, and I've kind of been a critic of Russell Wilson the past couple of years. I know ESPN did a thing, I think, last year or it was the beginning of this year, where they talked about Luck, RG3, Kaepernick, and Russell Wilson, and you had to rank the three of them, and they ranked Wilson, got the most votes. And I kind of thought that was blasphemy personally, but I'm starting to buy into the kid a little bit at this point. And as far as being elite, Dave, you touched on this a little bit. I don't think he's elite, obviously. Just like I didn't think Joe Flacco was elite after he won a Super Bowl. I didn't think Eli Manning was elite after he won Super Bowls, and people were saying you can't say elite without Eli and all of that jargon. But I do agree that I think he's kind of taken the leap over these younger guys in his his class, his genre, so to speak. Anybody else have anything on Russell Wilson?
You know what? You mentioned something, and I looked it up quickly. That I was thinking. You said he didn't hide, and I was gonna say I don't think he looked scared, and I don't think he looked like all I have to do is complete a few short passes. He had long passes of 37, 24, and 19 to his receivers. So he wasn't afraid to go deep on the Broncos defense that was letting it happen. And that's what you have to like to see from a younger quarterback. I don't think he's going to be elite, but he didn't hide.
Yeah, if it were me, I could have just sat there. You could have just sat there. He could have done nothing.
He could have just checked it down, passed a couple yards, picked up what he could, but he wasn't willing to go deep.
I mean, the bottom line, he didn't force it. He played within the system. He did what he was supposed to do on every play. First option, second option, and he just didn't play outside of that. He played within himself, and he played within the game plan and the playbook for the game. Didn't make any mistakes, and if you want to consider that elite, fine. I don't know what our definition of elite is here, but for right now, being in his second year, he played a great mistake-free game, and he deserves to be a Super Bowl champion after that.
So our last topic of the night, moving on, is more of a team topic. Actually, it's completely a team topic, and that's the likelihood of us seeing a rematch between the Seattle Seahawks, almost said Supersonics again. I've got basketball in the brain, fellas, and the Denver Broncos. And it's actually a two-part question. We'll kick the other part, actually, after I get your initial responses. We'll go with you first, Shane, since I feel like we're getting to you last every time.
It's all right.
What do you think the chances are that we see a Denver-Seattle Super Bowl again? And further than that, do you think that we will see that next season?
It's easy to say, no, I'm going to take the field on that, but I absolutely do not think that the Seahawks are going to get back to the Super Bowl next year. Everybody talks about what a young team that the Seahawks are, but actually when you look at the top of the roster, you're going to see a lot of churn there. The Seahawks have $50.6 million tied up in two positions, wide receiver and a defensive end. And those two wide receivers, Percy Harvin's not going anywhere. Sidney Rice is probably going to be off the team. Of their three defensive ends, Chris Clemens, Cliff Averill, and Red Bryant, one of those guys are going to be gone. The Seahawks have $88 million tied up in their top 10 players, and there's no way that they're going to be able to sustain that and maintain depth within their roster. So when you look at the division that they're in, I mean, seriously, the Arizona Cardinals, the San Francisco 49ers, I don't see them getting out of that division again as the division leader next year. As for the Broncos should have their offensive line back intact next year. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to keep Eric Decker, but I have faith that Peyton Manning, like Tom Brady, is going to make his receivers better. And I really think that when you see a healthy Von Miller next year in the playoffs, hopefully, I think Denver has a much better shot of getting back to the Super Bowl than Seattle.
Okay, so David, we'll go same question right to you.
Yeah, no, I couldn't disagree with Shane more, actually. I think the Seahawks are poised for a repeat. They've got the balance, and I don't have the salary figures are what they are, and he presented, and I'll grant him that, but I still think they've got that balance. I do acknowledge that the NFC, as we alluded to throughout the show, is the tougher conference. So getting out of that conference will be tougher, but I think the Seahawks have the inside path there. On the other side, I don't think the Broncos are going to do it. I think they had a perfect storm going. I'm not sure they're going to be able to stay healthy at the offensive line. I think their defense will regress a little bit. The AFC is kind of weak, so I'll give them that. Peyton Manning couldn't possibly perform better, so I could see him stepping back a little bit. So I'm going to say definitely a new team out of the AFC, and then the NFC is a toss-up, but if I had to put money on a team, I'd have to put the Seahawks coming out of the NFC.
We'll just keep going right in order. Brett, your thoughts?
I'm going to disagree with Dave, actually, and say that Manning in the AFC, I mean, he was one horrible play away from playing the 49ers in 2012, 2013. Oh, yeah. And this year they dominated the AFC the whole time. And if he's coming back, I think Decker's staying. Even if he's not, they have Moreno, they have Ball. They'll be completely fine. I don't see the Patriots being able to beat the Broncos. I don't see Kansas City, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, whoever it might be. I don't think anyone's going to keep up with that offense. And in the NFC, you still have Drew Brees and the Saints. You have the 49ers. You have Aaron Rodgers coming back healthy. Maybe RG3. You don't know what Washington's going to do. There's a lot of competition, and it's going to be tough to get through the NFC again.
Austin.
I'm going to try to stay on track here. Brett over here is talking trash on the Patriots. I could.
Well, we had the Cardinals player saying that Seattle's not going to win again. The Cardinals fan. I mean, come on now.
I mean, just let him have his moment. You know, let him have his off season. You know what I mean? But I mean, you want to look in the AFC. Yes, it was a weaker conference for sure, but I got to imagine there's going to be some improvement there. I don't think that the Broncos are going to take too many steps back, but I think that there's going to be a lot more competition in the AFC, particularly with the Patriots, being that I assume they'll still be in a pretty weak division, although I would be pretty worried about the Buffalo Bills going into next season. The other two teams I'm not too concerned about. So the Patriots still have their division that they're going to win. They were a top 10 defense with their defensive stars sidelined due to injury, and you know that second string, those young stars stepped up and still were able to be a top 10 defense in the league. And then you still have that number 12 guy behind center with Belichick on the sideline, and that very young wide receiver core just got a year of experience and got some playoff experience and kind of know the system more, know the expectations. Manning's not going to have it as easy next year as he did this year. Over in the NFC, I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks do not repeat. Of course, the rematch is possible, but the NFC there's just so much competition. I mean, it goes on and on. Chicago, Green Bay, you have the 49ers that are so close, and I really want to go on a limb and make them my Super Bowl pick for next year just because they still got the team intact. They're right there. They're so close, and they're certainly not going to just lie down. You still have the New Orleans Saints who have a powerful offense and an improving defense, a much improved defense. I just think with 32 teams and a lot of competition, there won't be a rematch.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to predict the rematch. I mean, you're in a sport where you're one and done throughout the playoffs. So many things can happen. I mean, we saw the Giants do it a couple times. But what I had written down here was I was kind of with Brett on this, and I think it was David that I was kind of against. I think as it stands right now, I feel like the NFC has way too many teams. And Austin, you were just saying this too. And I had Green Bay, San Francisco, Carolina were the top three I had written down.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot Carolina. Absolutely.
Carolina and San Fran had good seasons. And then we got Shane. I mean, Arizona had a pretty solid season. I don't know what it is they need to do. I saw Larry Fitzgerald is clearing a bunch of cap, restructuring or whatever he's doing. I still have worries about their quarterback position a little bit, but that's for another time.
Me too.
John Clayton seems to think the Rams are going to be the best team in the world soon. But the AFC, as I looked at it and I looked at it and I looked at it, and this isn't a slight, Austin, against the Patriots, as it stands right now, I just don't see a team to compete with Denver. I really don't. Like, I feel like New England certainly can if they make a couple of moves. But I just, as it stands right now, I'm just not seeing it. I feel like the NFC has a much more likely scenario to be played out as far as somebody stepping in there and taking. I mean, the Green Bay is kind of one of those misleading teams. I mean, because Rodgers missed so much time. I mean, they could easily win 12 games. I think Chicago is. I feel like Chicago can easily win 7 games, or they can win 10 games. I feel like Detroit's in the same boat. I don't have a lot of respect for the Vikings. I just feel like Green Bay can be such a dangerous team. I mean, and they almost beat San Fran, who, then in turn was there in the championship against Seattle. So I feel like there's just so many more possibilities as far as the NFC goes. We had a part B. That was kind of the A to this question. Our part B was
who can knock out the teams.
We already answered the part B. Jeez. I'm so good at hosting this show that it just flowed to you guys.
I have something for Austin, actually.
Okay, go ahead, Brett.
We just posted this the other day, but I mean, next year, Austin was saying Broncos might play tougher teams. Next year, right now, they play the AFC East, which will include the Bills, Patriots, Jets, Dolphins. Then they play the Colts, the Bengals, and they play the AFC West, which they were 5-1 this year against the AFC West.
Right.
So, I mean, maybe they lose to the Patriots like they did this year. That's 2 losses, and then maybe they split Indianapolis and Cincinnati. That's 3 losses. And then when you look at Seattle, they have to play NFC West, which is getting tougher. They have to play the Eagles, who were a playoff team. They have to play Carolina, who was a playoff team. They have to play Green Bay, who was a playoff team. And then the Cowboys, Giants, and the Redskins, who were, you never know what's going to happen in the NFC East. So I think Manning has an easy schedule next year.
Doesn't the AFC West play the NFC West next year?
It does, yeah.
Does it?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
I was looking at the chart we had.
I thought
we have a little chart. I thought we had a little picture that showed where they play. But I think they play the AFC East, which if they're playing.
I saw that with the little intersecting lines. That was.
I think that was just a sample. I don't think I think that was that. Here's how it works, but this is not the schedule for next year.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, Shane, because I was thinking, did they already have the schedule? That seemed a little premature for me. But let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go. Final thoughts, real quick, because the Super Bowl being over on Sunday does mark the end of the actual football season for the year. I know if I would have said the end of the football season, you guys would have started calling me out like it's going to be draft time and all this, and we'll have shows for that. But let's get our final thoughts on the 2013-14 season. We'll go right down the line, starting with you, Austin, real quick.
I just want to say, as a Patriots fan, I am just thrilled that they got as far as they did with all the injuries. Gives me a lot of hope for the future. You still saw Brady put up some amazing numbers with what he had, and it's really hard for people to go and shout out who they did have. And they're going to make some moves, but the biggest moves that are going to be made are naturally, and that is moving guys off of IR. And that's going to be the difference right there. I know every team gets plagued with injuries, but I'm just thrilled that we got there. And you could even say that maybe the conference championship games were more of a Super Bowl, because that NFC is just stacked compared to anything that the AFC had to offer this year. It was very one-sided.
Brett, your final thoughts.
I think we had a great 2013-2014 season. I mean, there's some surprise teams, a lot of interesting storylines for next year. Can Kansas City do it again? How does Nick Foles do in Philadelphia? Carolina and Cam Newton. You have the young guns with Kaepernick, Russell Wilson, RG3 coming back. I know that's Andy's favorite player. And, a bunch of young guys like that. Andrew Luck, how does he do in Indianapolis? So I'm sad to see the football season end. Excited for the draft because I love the draft. But I'm ready for August already.
David, your final thought, and try not to be too excited now that we know baseball season is
That's
approaching.
right. My first thing is that baseball season is right around the corner, boys, and we'll be having these shows, at least I will be, with maybe another subset group here in a month or two. But, no, it was a great season. It's interesting. I think Shane might have mentioned earlier, I was going into the season with a Texans-Falcons type Super Bowl, and you can see how wrong you can possibly be. You couldn't possibly be more wrong than that. And so it'll be interesting how the Texans bounce back next year. Now, I'm in Houston, so I'm even more interested than most. But they may not be that far off from turning it around. They had some bad luck this year. The other thing in the NFC, we didn't really talk about the NFC East much. We were throwing around a lot of teams. I never heard Cowboys come up, or Giants, or Eagles as possible Super Bowl contenders. You got to watch those teams. They're usually good. It's competitive, and sometimes the team, particularly the Giants, that comes out of there can certainly win it. And my Super Bowl prediction next year, I'm going to go way off to the sides. I'm going to say Colts versus Cardinals. I'll steal Shane's thunder, and that's going to be my
Okay.
It's not even the draft and free agency hasn't even occurred. How can you pick a Super Bowl winner?
Exactly.
I was a little sketchy to pick one. Let's get
Yeah.
Shane's final and what I feel like is going to be emotional thought, because we know Shane loves himself some NFL football.
Oh,
I want to see tears, Shane.
I'm really beat up about it, but my wife, on the other hand, is ecstatic that she is no longer a widow on Sundays because I sit in my chair from 1 o'clock to midnight. That's the reason why we have the season. That's why we're fans. Everything's got to come to an end. I think what was most exciting about the season is that you saw so many teams go from worst to first and then first to worst. I mean, that's what makes the NFL so appealing to everybody, is that any year it could be your team's year. I mean, honestly, I'm not. This is not a prediction, but I mean, you look at the Rams, and they have 2 first-round draft picks, and where they can stock up. I mean, you could see the Rams win the NFC West next year. It's just the way the NFL's built. So I'm kind of sad that they moved the draft to May, because I feel there's too big of a gap now between the end of the season and the draft. But I'm excited to get the offseason going and let the speculation begin. I just want everybody out there watching to remember that drafts are done for entertainment, not accuracy, not even Mel Kiper. And Todd gets it right.
My final thought is going to be one that's near and dear to my heart, and that is Detroit Free Press columnist Drew Sharp. The Lions do not need to trade Ndamukong Suh. You get those crazy thoughts out of your head. Not everybody can do what the Seattle Seahawks did, and that is build a defense on a lot of mediocre contracts. Though Shane did point out earlier in the defense of that they do have a lot of money tied up on the defensive line. But he talked about these guys that have these slimmer contracts. Don't be an idiot. And
you know that Suh's the second highest paid player in the league in 2014, right?
And rightfully so. That's my final thought. The guy's an animal.
More of that next week.
We'll go into that another time. I want to say thank you to everybody for bearing with us through our first 5 episodes here of the NFL playoffs. You can check out all our work at sports-kings.com. We also have a like page on Facebook that goes by the same title. Head over there, give us a like, and make sure you subscribe to our channel here. Leave us some comments, give us some feedback, and we'll chat you up a little bit. Until next time, thank you for watching. We're out. If I